Author Orhan Pamuk belongs to that very exclusive group of writers who've been awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. With his 10 novels and other works translated into more than 60 languages, his fans span the globe. But Pamuk's stories never veer far from his native Turkey, delving deeply into the psyche of a nation trying to reconcile parts of its past and present, of its Eastern and Westernness. His latest novel is The Red-Haired Woman, and Orhan Pamuk joins us now. It's so great to meet you.
Very pleased to meet you.
And I tell you, I'm not a big fiction guy, I gotta tell you. I'd have to read so much nonfiction for this job, but I read this and I really enjoyed it a lot. So thank you for writing it.
It has a novel of ideas part. Maybe that's why you like it.
Well, let's get into that, because you write about fathers and sons, you write about abandonment, you write about revenge, some very surprising developments. The whole time I read it, I thought this is going to make a great movie as well sometime. How did The Red-Haired Woman come to you? What inspired you?
First, it has a realistic part that in 1988, I was trying to finish one of my books, and in the land next to me around Istanbul, an old-fashioned well-digger and his disciple came, and just like in the book, they begin to dig a well. And I was observing them. And they said, after a while, "Sir, can we have electricity? Can we take some water from you?" And a relation developed, and after which I asked them, "You know, I'm a writer, let's talk, tell me stories." And then essentially they told me, the master well-digger told me this story about trying to find water in a barren land in European part of Istanbul. At that time, it was an empty land. The town did not, at that time, in mid-1980s, did not swallow those places. And I listened to enthusiasm, and it stayed with me. One reason that this story stayed with me was that every day I was watching them. During the day, the father-like, authoritarian well-digger was scolding, shouting, even crushing his disciple, while at night he was so tender, friendly, caring about, do you want some more food, that kind of thing.
That is a fascinating relationship, but you have taken this story so far beyond that premise. Where did all that come from?
And after a while, this story stayed with me, their relationship, and after a while, I thought about this. And now that I'm getting old, I have many stories in my mind, but I decided to write it when I managed to associate this story with Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, and Firdevsi's Rustam and Suhrab, which is, one is about killing of the father by individual, the other of killing of the son by the father who represents the state, the army, and this or that. And I decided that now that my country, in the last 3 years, getting authoritarian, I wanted to focus on this aspect of well-digging, their relationship. Perhaps also because that I was raised with a father who never scolded me, but who was also never that close, attend to the details of my life.
Well, that was something I wanted to ask you about, because, of course, there are a number of father-son relationships in the book, and I assumed at some point you drew on your own relationship with your own father as what, inspiration for those relationships?
Yes, I was not crushed by a Freudian father, so to speak. Sometimes I think maybe that's why I'm a writer, maybe that's why I'm a free person. But I was also more interested in, why do people still like fathers who crush their sons? Or perhaps implying that in Turkey there is a lot of authoritarianism going on, but still people vote for the ruling party, Erdogan's party. Why do they continue to vote him? And of course, implying that he finds water for us. He finds water for them.
The father figure who finds water.
Yes. It was, in fact, the German-American scientist, social scientist, sinologue, Wittfogel, who associated with Oriental despotism, with irrigation systems in China, that he argued that only authoritarian rulers in Asian countries, I don't believe in this, but this is his theory, can bring economical development. And I saw Modi's India, developments in Turkey, and Erdogan, his increasing authoritarianism. Then I thought, maybe it is the time to understand what's happening, not only looking at the situation through my own liberal values, but also understand why my people, some of the people I find so normal, decent, still continue to vote
we're going to come back to the Erdogan theme a little later in the interview, but I notice you do have the book open to a particular page, and I would like to impose upon you, if I can, to read a section from the book. This is from fairly early in the book, and, well, the floor is yours, sir.
So, when we read from a book, we have to tell who's talking here, who's speaking here. The master well-digger is talking to a sort of a disciple. This is what I actually saw, and then I developed and invented this story. Is your master is your master very domineering? Is he strict? Asks the red-haired woman in the story. Well, yes, but he looks out for me like a father, and he talks to me and cares about me. But he also expects me to obey his orders and always do as he says. So do as he says, said the red-haired woman, smiling sweetly. He is not forcing you to be his apprentice. Isn't your family well off? Had Master Mahmud told the red-haired woman that I was a little gentleman? Had they spoken about me? So these are anxieties about being a little bourgeois boy. My father left us, I said. Then he wasn't a father at all, she said. Find yourself a new father. We all have many fathers in this country. The fatherland, Allah, the army, the mafia. No one here should ever be fatherless.
And Erdogan is attempting to be everybody's father now? Is that the idea?
Yeah, but I'm not, this is not a medieval allegory. I'm not pointing out fingers that much, but of course I am alluding to these deep structures. I treat today's politics more like Jungian archetypes, the Sophocles, Oedipus Rex, or Rustam and Suhrab, one about killing of the father, the other of the killing of the son. I compare them and try to understand almost the literary foundations of authoritarianism in my part of the world.
But let's go back 30 years to when this story is set. What's happening politically in Turkey at that time?
Compared to 1970s, 1980s were better time. In 1970s, as I wrote in my Silent House Black Book, people were left-wingers and right-wingers, unfortunately, were shooting each other in the streets. You have to be careful, the newspaper you were carrying. Then there was a military coup in between. I think compared to 1970s and 1980s were good liberal times. At the beginning, there was a military coup, but then army pulled off, and a sort of a semi-democracy or more developing, promising years. What is relevant here is that in mid-1980s, the old-fashioned methods of well-digging, which was in Istanbul, in Byzantium for 2,000 years, stopped because of these new machines. This is also a novel about ending of a craft. Just like in My Name is Red, I like and pay attention to the sadness of a craft, art that continues for thousands of years, disappears because of modernity.
So these are changing modern times, but how would a red-haired woman be regarded 35 years ago in this part of the world?
Okay, in England, I was in England just a month ago, and I thought, my God, so many genuinely red-haired women here. And from Shakespeare to Sylvia Plath, red-haired woman is uncontrollable. She is angry, she is distinct, she has character. More or less the same in my part of the world. But add to it, since she is rare, because it's not in the genes, it's not in the blood, that most of the time she dyes her hair. But add to it, now that she dyes her hair, she may be also a bit easy virtue. You may have sex with her or this kind of thing. Then I ask this question, then why do some women dye their hair red? Of course, they are challenging you. They are not crushed by the rules. And writing about my country, my part of the world, usual cliche and partly true, that religion, tradition, pre-modern man crush women. Yes, that's true, and even they crush more than, say, in West, perhaps because of religion too. But they fight back. They tell their stories. They're, as I also did in Strangers in My Mind, with their humor, anger, I want to see their humanity full.
Would a red-haired woman be regarded differently in Istanbul compared to
Not much,
the more
really.
remote parts?
She will be an actress, as in the novel. Yeah. She will be a bit more charming, more devilish, more interesting. But on the other hand, you would be interested in her.
You write in the book that Istanbul has been, quote, denatured and defiled. Is that true?
Yes.
Your view.
Unfortunately, this is what I also saw in Toronto. I was here in 1990. It was a city of two-story houses. More or less the same happened here in Istanbul. A lot of beton, and all the memories, all the small little cozy things that make us love a city. A bridge, a street, my memories are destroyed. On the other hand, I am also want to be egalitarian, democratic. I am not. I'm welcoming the newcomers. I think Europe was repressing the immigrants. Istanbul has been changed because of internal immigration from poorer parts of Turkey. And in fact, Weldingen was so popular in 1970s because there was so much immigration to Istanbul and the government could not supply water to these people, so they have to work with old-fashioned methods of wind axe and dig themselves to find water.
You mentioned the Oedipus myth earlier. And I think a lot of people watching this program remember the Oedipus myth. But there's another one here. You also talk about a Persian epic poem called Shahnameh.
It's a penguin classic. It's not an obscure book, just like Sophocles, Oedipus Rex is a penguin classic.
Okay.
When I was researching for my novel, My Name is Red, which is based on old Islamic, Ottoman, Persian, classical myths and stories, I came across these stories that, my God, I read Oedipus Rex in high school, in an American high school in Istanbul. This is almost a mirror image of this story, except this time, father kills the son. Father first, and the father, again, just like Oedipus, is very worried that he may by accident kill his son. So there's a lot of anxiety about not killing his son.
But why does that resonate so much with you? Because it's such a huge part of the book. Why do you care so much about that?
Perhaps because the subject of fathers and sons is also popular in Japan, also popular in Russia, because countries like Japan, Turkey, and Russia imposed modernity and a fast modernity. And the modernity we saw, say, in France in 200 years, we saw in my part of the world in 50 years, where then you can identify the great change with generations. And the difference between fathers and sons is not arbitrary. It's a generational change, and it's a dramatical change. And then it overlaps with westernization and criticism of it. That Ottoman Empire, Ottoman and Turkish ruling elite realized that westernization is the only way to save the country, but there was, of course, a conservative resistance to it. That set the standard for politics for 200 years.
Let me ask you about that, because there is a point in the book where you praise the Iranians. Here's from the book. The Iranians were not like us Turks, who had become so westernized that we'd forgotten our old poets and myths. It sounds like you're expressing sadness for the fact that Turkey is sort of losing touch with its Ottoman roots.
Yes, I argue that modernization should not necessarily be about forgetting. You have to rewrite old myths again, write them and give them a modern outlook. In fact, that's what I'm partly doing in this book. That's what I did in My Name is Red, my black book. That is, modernization is not for me forgetting the medieval past, medieval text, old text, but in whatever, call it modernist, postmodernist way, rewriting, appropriating them in such a way that it sheds light to what's happening today in a deeper manner.
Your novel, of course, spends a lot of time, I guess, comparing and contrasting this tug of war between the draw of Turkey to the east and the draw to the west. And you feel it strongly, obviously. Is it felt as strongly in present-day Turkey as you suggest in the book?
I think in politics in present-day Turkey went bad in the last 2 years after the military coup, I think 16 months ago. Before that, there was normal democracy going on. Yes, political Islamist party was gaining and successful, but then partly they were successful. Also, they were good in economical boom. That is, they were founding water. But in the last, especially last 16 months, 130,000 people were fired from their jobs. 50,000 people are in jail. Some of them, my friends. Again, 180 journalists are jailed. Some of them my friends who are novelists too, but they're not in jail for their novels, by the way. And most of the time, they're in jail for their journalistic activity, criticizing the government too much. In the end, that doesn't really sound like a democratic country. I believe there is no democracy without free speech, and free speech is disappearing in Turkey. What Habermas would have called public sphere, unfortunately, where you can freely discuss country's problem. You may have leftist point, you may have conservative point of view, you may have this point, secular point of view, Islamist point of view. That space is unfortunately disappearing. But I didn't write this novel to point that out. I do interviews sometimes, and as I tell you too, I write my novels, try to understand deeper structures, try to understand, as I treat them now, as Carl Gustav Jung treated old stories, calling them archetypes. In a way, I'm trying to understand increasing authoritarianism in Turkey through old myths in the manner Freud would have, or Carl Jung would have approached the problem.
But your protagonist in this book would have felt very comfortable in a Turkey that was allowed to be a part of the European Union, right? He is a wealthy businessman, more liberal values, et cetera, et cetera. The way things are going, is Turkey ever going to be in the EU?
Not, in the last 5 years, it was clear for everyone that unfortunately we're not going towards Europe. But in the last 2 years, now we're going away from Europe. I am also, okay, if we stay where we are, in between 2004 and 2008, I was involved in making propaganda for Turkey, for EU taking Turkey to the European Union. But it didn't work out. Perhaps Sarkozy and Angela Merkel did not want it. I cannot criticize them too much. But now, I accepted, I didn't cry about that, I accepted the fact that Turkey is not going to join European Union, say around 2014-15. But now we are going even away from the other direction, which I'm very upset about.
I should point out that you are here in Toronto because you gave a lecture at the Aga Khan Museum, which is a beautiful, relatively new museum here in the capital city of Ontario. But you have your own museum in Turkey, and I should ask you about that, the Museum of Innocence. What is that?
Museum of Innocence is both a novel with the same title and also a museum that I made, and the novel treats the function of the novel is a sort of an annotated museum catalog where there are no pictures and annotations are manipulated and written in such a way and put in such a consequence that the catalog reads like a novel. This was the initial idea. Then I wrote the novel, which is a love story. Our character is infatuated by his twice-removed cousin from the poor branch of the family, so much that he collects everything she touches, including landscapes, postcards, photos. And I exhibited them in the Museum of Innocence in Istanbul.
Just beautiful. Look at that.
And we have vitrines, windows, corner-like boxes, each corresponding to the chapters of the novels.
And did you curate all of the items that are in the museum?
Yes, since I wanted to be a painter between the ages of 7 and 22, as I wrote in my autobiographical Istanbul, there is a dead artist in me which resurrected to make a Museum of Innocence. I both wrote the novel and did the museum, but it's not that one day I had a successful love novel and wanted to make a museum out of it. I thought about them simultaneously. In fact, politics of the museum is also in the novel.
I see. I want to ask you about a difficult time in your life. And now we're going to go back 12 years. You were charged. You were supposed to go to trial.
I went to trial.
You went to trial.
I went to many trials.
You were charged for talking about the Armenian genocide. And I want to know what was the crime that you were alleged to have committed?
I talk about what happened to Ottoman Armenians, and my mind was not too busy with historical details, but mostly my mind was busy. Not only this, many other things in Turkish past, is that we are not able to talk about these things in a free way. And in fact, what is even happening today is also is happening because we don't have free speech. We cannot criticize these things. We cannot talk about these things. That was my problem.
And what were you charged with?
I was charged with insulting Turkishness and arbitrary accusation. I'm proud to belong to Turkish culture and promoting it in my novels for so many years. It was an arbitrary accusation. Now they have, for example, today they're not accusing anyone. Mostly now today they are accusing people of insulting the president. These and some 20 years ago making communist propaganda. Even if you say some liberal things, they would accuse you of. They always find some excuse to suppress. Unfortunately, people, let's not forget that there's 50,000 people are in jail, and there is also arbitrariness in accusations, which scares everyone, silences everyone, and it's understandable.
What happened to the charges in your case?
I think they were dropped, but then there's no explanation why they dropped. Probably there was international outcry, and at that time, Erdogan's government wanted to be friendly with Europe, wanted to promote liberal values, and at that time, seculars were seemed to be less democratic and were less friendly with Europe than Erdogan, and that was the irony of the day, in fact.
Do you still feel a chill in speaking in Turkey?
Yes, who doesn't? That fear is common to human hearts, then you are afraid. But then it's also bravery. Saying the truth is also common to human heart. And there are so many brave people in Turkey, they try to say it. But I did a major interview with the biggest Turkish newspaper, Hürriyet. In the end, they couldn't publish it. The editors are my friends. I cannot accuse them, but they're pressured so much by the government.
And they wouldn't publish it because?
Because I was criticizing the government. There was a referendum in April, and I said I will not say yes. I said I will say no, and they couldn't publish it.
We talked earlier about the coup that failed, the attempted coup against Erdogan. You know, how much did it affect what Turks thought of their country and themselves?
Yeah, it was sad to watch that coup because coincidentally, immediately I was aware, all the televisions were aware, the whole nation watched the coup live, and I was one of them. It made me sad because we all thought military coups were back. The whole nation criticized the military coups, and again they were trying to do this. And it was, at the beginning, the government is right when there's a military coup, 250 people are killed to have, purge. But then it went it went too far. Then the people who definitely, honestly, ethically, I believe, are not involved, just because they were criticizing the government, were put into jail as an excuse, and the coup is used, the purge is used as an excuse.
Yes. You have, I guess, the last many years split your time between Turkey and the United States, where you have been teaching as well. Do you have any fears about going back to Turkey or spending more time there?
I don't, or even if I have them, you have to be brave. Also, 10 years ago, when I was in trouble, everyone called me, all of my good friends called me and said, Orhan, just find a friend in Europe or America, go away for a while. When this last year's development, this time I asked my friends, shall I stay? Shall I go? 50% said yes, go. 50% said no, stay. There is a meaningful political fight here. And let's not forget that government bloc's votes are now only 51%, and opposition, to which perhaps I also belong, I'm not a political person in that sense, is getting 49%, and the trends are like this. It is very interesting, and I'm proud to be being part of it.
When you are in Turkey, though, do you feel threatened?
Yes, but I have bodyguards, and I
bodyguards?
don't. Yes. Yes, and many writers in my part of the world have bodyguards. I have bodyguards because not of the recent developments or about my past, about my critical attitude. It's okay. I'm happy with that. I belong to Istanbul. I belong to Turkey. There may be some problems, but I will return. I'll be part of it.
I want to read another excerpt from the book here. It seems we would all like a strong, decisive father telling us what to do and what not to do. Is it because it is so difficult to distinguish what we should and shouldn't do, what is moral and right from what is sinful and wrong? Or is it because we constantly need to be reassured that we are innocent and have not sinned? Is the need for a father always there, or do we feel it only when we are confused or anguished when our world is falling apart? Do you think President Erdogan's popularity, such as it is a reaction among a good chunk of Turks to a world that they see falling apart?
Yes, I agree. But I also want to criticize Western journalists, not too much about that. I think in Erdogan's popularity lies his economical success rather than political Islam. That in the last 15 years, the economical boom and change in the last 15 years, I'm 65 years old, is bigger than the first 50 years. The change in Istanbul, I'm not very happy about that. Modernization, that the crushing of the old wooden houses, disappear, fires and all that happened in the first 50 years. But in the last 15 years, there was so much economical boom that paved way for Erdogan's party's success.
I'm curious, finally, how the book is being received in Turkey.
It is my most popular book, I'm embarrassed to say. Sometimes I say because it's short and cheap.
But that's not why it's successful.
Yeah, how can I say, what can I say? How can I explain that?
It tells a great story, but some of what you talk about in this book is a slice of Turkey that some Turks will find uncomfortable or embarrassing to be talked about to the rest of the world.
No, that a good author's belonging to his nation, even his nationality, comes from his criticism of his country.
Well, you see that, but perhaps the regime does not see that.
Okay, I don't know. We'll survive.
Let's hope so. I want to thank you very much for giving us so much time here at TVO tonight. Orhan Pamuk, The Red-Haired Woman, is his latest from this Nobel Prize-winning writer. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.